actually with Dr. Murtaugh, I had a wonderful independent study with him, and I looked at the biblical exegesis in the Middle Ages, and so I know exactly what you're talking about, the Bach text that explains all of that. And actually, in tying it, I was, again, I have notes everywhere of leads, but the idea of what would you call it? You know, there's the medium of the visual, there's the narrative, right, the oral, but what about the psychological narrative that we create ourselves? And that's the most important one. That's what this is meant to induce, right? It's a catalyst for that. Thank you very much for coming. So yeah, there's a lot to be dug around with that, but what about the medium of up here? That's where the real work happens. And of course, you know, we are coming, you know, through the end of the Middle Ages, which is wonderful with Christian apologetics and all these methodologies and structures of understanding, and that's where all these things come from or are perpetuated by. Why this means something and that means something different in its form, or even just the texture, the color, the numbers, whatever it is. So being able to dive into that, I think, would also be a very rich avenue to pursue. And again, the idea of the internal as a media, or creating all of this, because that ties into the meme theory and all that sort of thing. I just didn't have a chance to pursue it yet, but that's bothering me. That there's something, if you leave that out, then what do you have? It's audience.
Yeah, that structure might help you, and it is interesting, and as you say wisely, I mean, this points in a lot of directions, and a lot of developments. I mean, I know an article, in fact, you might even want to mention in some later version, but where Hamlet is an elaborate dramatic memento mori, where he in his inky cloak is, you know, hanging about the tomb of his father, and all of this imagery of death and bones and death and the emperor worm, and but then somewhere around the middle of the play, he pops up behind a tombstone. He comes back from the dead. He was as good as dead, and he's a very different Hamlet. Right? Yeah. The readiness is all he can face it. So I'm sure this is something you can keep tracing out in future projects.
And of course, it just goes into so many directions that, again, trying to find a place to stop is hard to do. Yeah, it's because we did Hamlet in your class as well, and yeah, it was like Alas Poor Yorick. You know, that was the first, literally facing death. As they do in a lot of treatments where they have that skull, and of course the to be or not to be, the famous one. So it leads from seeing somebody else in that position to considering your own, and then experiencing it.
Yeah, and then his beloved Ophelia did, and then he jumps in the grave and he jumps out of it again. Yeah. So yeah.
And of course her death, in a watery death, you know, of course it's subconscious and the liminal stage and all that. I mean, there's so much, right? Shakespeare's a whole nother Pandora's box. But yes, there's essentially the art, the literature, the architecture, everything over there at this time is dripping with all of this. And I'm just fascinated by it. It's not that it's not obvious and that nobody has seen it, but it's what is its function? How is it structured? How does it work? Why does it work? Why does it still work? You know, we walk in, you can be an art historian, you don't have to be Catholic at all. You walk in and you're like, wow, this is telling me something, right? Of course, what it's telling you can be debated, and that's the fun part. However, there's so much potential. So I should have started this 20 years ago. Go ahead.
Question: at the top of the dome above him, is that a small ceiling painting which carries your vision straight up to heaven and possibly God looking down and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. It's and thank you to Dr. Conrad for teaching us this. That many of the Baroque chapters, they have that blurring of the real and the ethereal. Yeah. So it does look like the sky is up here, even though it's absolutely not. And then, of course, when you're in these cathedrals, you do have the real cornices but then at a certain point, when you can't tell, the human eye can't tell anymore, they are painted. So you can't tell what's real and what's not real, and it is that blurring of reality with the art and the spiritual. So it brings this ethereal to earth just as Caravaggio brought the spiritual to reality and showing everyday people in doing spiritual things. You know, Saint Jerome, he looks like an everyday guy at the time. So there's that blending that there is heaven on earth, and it's closer than you think, and so it gives you pause for thought instead of, as Dr. Martin said, well, shoot, let's just, live up the life we have here, and there will be totally different transcendence when we get to heaven. It's sort of the two are this is a liminal stage between the ethereal planes, and so we want to end up on the upper side, not the lower side, when everything finishes out. So yeah, it is. It makes it more real. It makes it more everyday, and that's very powerful rhetoric.
And it's also more, interestingly enough, it's more sensual. The Counter-Reformation art is much more sensual, and so the reality of life, you can sort of sense the blood running under the skin of Saint Jerome.
Oh yeah, oil painting just blows me away. See if I can, wow, yeah. So I mean, you can see again with my elaboration. Mostly what you see of Jerome is his head, which is his mind, and of course his arm. For this age, and he's pretty cut, so he has strength in his writing. He's been writing a lot. So this shows that, this has been his life's work, and of course it's God's work.
Yeah.
Look how beat up his quill is, and there's so much to read in this. But yeah, it has that, and that at the same time, you're doing God's work for a reason, and of course that reason being, notice how on the death side this is white. You would expect it to be black, but it's white because he's doing God's work, so it's actually the redemption. So you mentioned blood of Christ and so forth. That might be an interesting read on the red here as well. But yeah, it's not death in the end and the annihilation. It's moving into a different plane that is a better plane of purity and so forth. So lots of great stuff in that. Yeah, I like that.
You think the jasper stone, it really, the underside of that blanket that he's lifting up really does look pretty gory.
It does.
and what frightens us in that is maybe we're being challenged to look at it with different eyes and think of the redemptive blood of Christ.
Yeah, very much. And also, I like that. I'd like to pursue that idea. Again, this goes back into the fight or flight response. If you look at death in its worst conditions, so that would be like the transy tombs, that would be the corpse figure, that would be all the blood and the gore. You can look at it and go, wow, that's what's going to happen. And actually, I could pull up a whole bunch of transy tombs that are knockout, but they're really hardcore. But if you look at it and you get used to it, all right, well, you know what? It's not that scary because I won't be there to know it. I'm going to be in heaven because I'm a good Christian, I follow the church. So that's something we all fear, but you don't have to. And I think that it's that confronting your worst fear that psychologically allows you to cope. So yeah, you can see this as a, again, redemptive blood, going back into ancient mythology, blood doesn't have to be scary or fearsome or horrific, right? It can be with sacrifices and so forth. It's part of life. It's something that can cause good, as in the case of sacrifice, and again, redemption in the Christian narrative with the sacrificial blood of Christ. So yeah, lots of
and what is covered on the death?
Yeah.
It's his face, right?
Yeah.
It's the head. It's that personal, right? Where's your sting? It's that
exactly.
menacing look of death staring you down.
And his wings, notice, are really reduced compared to a lot of the previous ones. They're usually overwhelming, about ready to envelop you. Very, very reduced. And no scythe, if you notice. It's just, hey, your time's up, let's go. I just need to sit in the Vatican for a whole day and stare at it. Are there any other questions or suggestions, comments? Okay.
Nothing, we'll invite everybody, but the members of the committee to exit the room. where we have the
Before people
discussion.
exit, we're gonna go over, regardless of everything, thank you, we're gonna go over to Jay Alexander's, you're all invited.